Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. On today's Fronteras, we're presenting a special documentary. More than 120,000 Japanese Americans living along the West Coast were incarcerated without due process during World War II. 75 years later, ripples of that history are still being felt. Borders and Heritage, the long journey toward healing, presents first-hand accounts of Japanese American residents from Washington State whose families endured incarceration.
I was a POW of the United States of America in a concentration camp.
There were always soldiers, searchlights, barbed wire fences that enclosed us. It was very, very difficult to get used to.
It should not happen to anybody ever again the way it happened to us.
We're here on Bainbridge Island, the site of what was once a ferry dock. Today, it is a memorial to a dark time in our nation's past. 75 years ago, U.S. soldiers forced Japanese Americans who lived here on the island to leave. Young and old, they were boarded onto ferries and taken to concentration camps. They were the first of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II. And even though most were U.S. citizens, they became prisoners in their own country. I'm Enrique Cerna, and this is a special edition of KCTS 9's Borders and Heritage. We've gathered first-hand accounts of those who endured incarceration and their long journey toward healing in the decades since. We begin by meeting Kei Sakai Nakao, who grew up here on Bainbridge Island.
I was raised on the farm and busy all the time, and I went to school, came home, and helped on the farm. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was, or what it was, or anything. You know, we were just country bumpkins on the farm. I was 22, 75 years ago.
I was born and raised in Seattle, right down in 2nd and Jackson is where we lived primarily. My first career was in the Air Force. Every once in a while we had to get up and speak about what our backgrounds were. My opening sentence was, I was a POW of the United States of America in a concentration camp.
What we went through, nobody should have to go through that.
The Japanese immigration story is really similar to other immigration stories in America. They came to start a new life.
My dad left Japan in 1914 and he landed in Canada. Then he came into the United States.
They came because there was a need for workers, either in the canneries or in the railroads, in the timber industry.
Japanese Americans were the largest minority group before World War II in Seattle. So about 4% of the population. The war really disrupted the Japanese American community.
No matter what our enemies in their desperation may attempt to do to us, we will say, as the people of London have said, we can take it. And what's more, we can give it back, and we will give it back with compound interest.
President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 a couple of months after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. It put 120,000 Japanese Americans behind barbed wire, under armed guard. 2/3 of these individuals were U.S. citizens, and they did nothing wrong.
At that time, the West Coast region was #1, the most populous in terms of people of Japanese ancestry, but it was also considered a very sensitive region just because of the proximity to Japan.
So the words the government used were very intentional to make it sound like this very peaceful, normal thing. They called the whole process an evacuation.
Evacuation. More than 100,000 men, women, and children, all of Japanese ancestry, removed from their homes in the Pacific Coast states to wartime communities.
When we use the term evacuation, we think of a humanitarian effort.
In actuality, you were taking people from their homes who were not guilty of anything and placing them in concentration camps for an indefinite period of time, and that's really what was happening.
How do you incarcerate people without due process? I mean, that's fundamental to constitutional rights.
Bainbridge Islanders, we were the first ones removed. So when the order came for us to be uprooted, and we were never told where we were going, how long we were going to be gone. Oh, it was scary. Even after we arrived at Manzanar, there was nobody to tell us, this is Manzanar, this is where you're going to live. Nothing. I think the barracks were divided into 4 units, but there was nothing there, just iron cots.
We were allotted one room for 5 children and 2 adults. Some of the people had to stay in horse stalls. It's a lot of anger because of what happened.
It was really hard because I think for most people who had businesses, generally small businesses, they were wiped out. After the war, less than half the people Japanese Americans who lived in Seattle before the war came back to Seattle.
After the war, we lived in this building here for about 2 years.
The Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington operates the longest running Japanese language school. And then after the camps were closed, it was used as a temporary housing, temporary being about, 14 years.
So I was in a meeting and someone pointed to me and said, your family lived in the Japanese language school. Here's the Hunt Hotel plaque with all the names of the families that lived here.
Yeah, that's us there.
Yeah. And I said, my family? They go, yeah, your family lived there. And I never heard that story.
This is my grandfather.
That's your grandfather?
Mm-hmm. He didn't live in this building here, but he lived in the next building over.
I didn't even know he was here.
Yeah, he was. That's Suzuki.
Huh.
It never occurred to me that I should talk about that.
I think there's a lot of people who could not talk about their experience. And it wasn't until several decades later that people felt okay about talking about what happened to their family.
So we didn't talk about our internment experience until over 40 years later. It took us that long to say anything.
And part of that is the feeling of shame. Although you're not convicted of any crime or you're not guilty of doing anything wrong, the very fact that you're incarcerated and that your rights are taken away must say something about your status in America. I think we lost sight of the principles upon which we were built, as a nation. This whole idea of immigration and being a place of opportunity, equality, and that we value diversity.
We were American citizens, and we didn't do anything bad. and we were taken. So we feel that it should not happen to anybody ever again the way it happened to us.
Not only were Japanese Americans forced to leave their homes, many also lost their businesses. They had less than a week to make plans for their shops or restaurants. Most sold them at whatever price they could get, and some had to be abandoned. Seattle's once vibrant Japantown neighborhood, or Nihonmachi, was devastated. After the war, those who returned had to start over from nothing. That was the case for the owners of a hidden gem restaurant in Seattle's International District called Maneki.
Maneki opened in 1904 and will be 113 years old this year. We don't claim to be the oldest Japanese restaurant in Seattle, but everybody else does. We're a little bit like the ambassador for Japan, trying to introduce different kinds of sakes, different kinds of foods, different kinds of sushi. Maneki is a restaurant, but we also think that it binds everybody to like certain memories. We had one dishwasher, and his name was Takeo Miki. He soon later became Prime Minister of Japan. We have Mom, and she's designated Mom because she knew everybody.
Don't pout, smile.
Oh, okay, I'm smiling.
I'm 87 years old, and I've been working here over 50 years, and everybody here calls me Mom. Maneki is welcome cat, and welcoming everybody, please come in. And in America, when you go like this, you're waving goodbye, but in the Maneki cat is waving everybody to come. My husband worked in the kitchen as assistant chef, and all 6 of my boys, they worked as busboys, and all 3 of my grandsons, they worked here as busboys. One certain person that remains on my mind is when Microsoft's Bill Gates came in, and he sat at the sushi counter, and he wanted a drink, and I asked him, may I see your ID? And everybody says, you carded Bill Gates? And I says, well, I didn't know who he was.
Original Maneki used to be on the hill here between Maine and Washington, and it used to be a 3-story type of Japanese castle. It was all white. It had a beautiful garden as you enter through the gate there. The second floor sat up to 500 people in a Japanese-style rooms. It was a very community type of a place where if you had a wedding or if you had a funeral or you had some other dignitaries come into town, that's where you would go.
It was a Sunday morning when the war started, and I was walking home from church all the way home. All I heard was people say, Jap, 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 and then it was kind of scary walking home. And then we had the curfew, and all of a sudden they said, oh, we have to leave. And we had only 1 suitcase each to pack.
After the executive order, you had 3 days. The Sato family had to pack up and then went to camp and leave the original Maneki as it was. During the internment, the original Maneki was ransacked, and because of all the hatred towards the Japanese at that time, it is a painful chapter in there in the history of Maneki.
This is the Minadoka interlude, and this is what it looked like. And each block has the names of the people that was living there, and that's what the block looked like. This is the block that I was in, block 14. After the war ended, different people went to different parts of the state, and a few of them did not come back to Seattle.
Mr. Soto decided it was too big a grand deal for an older couple to try to achieve what they had before the war. So they just decided to just settle in this space. My husband was a chef here, and he became the caretaker of Maneki, and he had the restaurant up to his death in '98. Maneki's longevity, I think, is our customers. And sometimes there's like 3 generations coming through the door. And I have the privilege of seeing that. And that's what really makes Maneki, is the customers.
Maneki has always been Maneki. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I could live without Maneki. Maneki is my life.
See more from this series online.
The community is how they really got through and were able to persevere and move on with life and their business.
Go to kcts9.org/borders.
My name is Paul Kikuchi, and one of my main projects here is cataloging and digitizing a large collection of Japanese 78 RPM records that have been donated from the Japanese community in Seattle between the years of 1900 and 1950 or so is when the music was recorded. A lot of these records also were artifacts that had to be given up during the internment, just because 78 RPM records made of shellac are very heavy. Some of the earliest records we have in our collection are from around 1910. The earliest recordings made in Japan. These are really interesting because they're single-sided, so it's before they actually even figured out they could put music on both sides of the record. Some of that earliest wave of Japanese immigrants were likely bringing some of these records first with them. Early immigrants were also likely having records sent to them by family members from Japan during those years as well. This box would have been, you know, what someone's music collection would have looked like in this one storage box. Our ultimate goal is to have a digital database where researchers who are looking into studying the Japanese American community in Seattle at that time can look at what were people listening to, what was in their music collections, and get a better historical reference of the area through the music. We feel that the records themselves are a really interesting window into the Japanese and Japanese American population in the 20th century in the Seattle area.
Imagine being a high school student looking forward to the future, only to have your world turned upside down because you look like the enemy. Mary Matsuda Grunewald knows what that is like because she lived it. 75 years later, she was finally able to experience what war and incarceration had taken from her.
You were an honor student.
Yes, I was.
Yep, so this is your gold cords.
You put it underneath this so it stays, I think, so it doesn't slide off.
Wow.
Ah, look at you. You've got dressers.
So much stuff.
Big time. Can't get used to this.
So have a wonderful day. It's your graduation day here.
Wonderful. Rain or shine, it doesn't matter. I was a junior when, the war came and we had to leave. So I never did go to Vashon High School as a senior. May 16, 1942 was the day that we had to leave. Papa-san figured out that Vashon was a good place to raise a family. There was Papa-san, Mama-san, my older brother Yonechi, and me. My parents were farmers. We would go along and pick the biggest, the reddest, the juiciest berries and put them into these little boxes. This was all strawberries in here. You know, one of the memories I have is lying on the lawn and watching the clouds float by. You know, it's amazing the amount of memories that keep crowding in on my consciousness. It was on a Sunday. We had gone to Sunday school and to church. And afterwards, as we were leaving, one of the men said to my brother, "Well, your countrymen sure did it to us."
President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air.
So I asked Mama-san, "What's going to happen to us?" And she said, "I don't know, Medi-san, but whatever it is, we will handle it together." Living in that kind of environment where there were always soldiers, searchlights, barbed wire fences that enclosed us, and so many people, it was very, very difficult to get used to. They set up a school system. I remember I had to draw the keys on a piece of paper and pretend like we were typing. It was all imagination. One day, we had this loyalty oath that had to be answered. The no-no people signed no, they would not be loyal to a country that was treating us as aliens. Mama-san said to me, 20 years from now, what kind of memories do we want to have of how we faced this difficulty now? And I think it was in that moment that the conflict became really clear. When I heard about that atom bomb being dropped, I remember dropping on my knees and just weeping. I had the relief, yes, the war is over now, but also the devastation on my parents' homeland, even though they had made the United States their permanent home. A person has to feel loved in order to heal. The sense of solidarity within our family, our love for each other was always there. Each person is precious, special, irreplaceable, and we need to treat each other as though the other person is special.
It is our great privilege and honor to graduate today Mary Matsuda Gruenwald, class of 1943 and 2017. Today she'll be presented not only with a diploma, a copy also of the 1943 yearbook. Wow. as well as a copy of the 2017 yearbook signed by our students and staff. Congratulations, Mary.
Thank you very much.
In 1988, President Ronald Reagan offered a formal apology and restitution to Japanese Americans for the unjust incarceration. In signing the Civil Liberties Act, he said, "We admit a wrong. We reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law." You can watch this series and more by going to kcts9.org/borders. I'm Enrique Cerna. Thanks for joining us.